They called the police and said they'd found a little girl on the street, alone and in tears. But about where she actually came from, how she ended up on that sidewalk in the middle of the night, the caller didn't say a single word. And it's from this brief, almost routine phone call that a story begins in which every detail will turn out to be a lie, calm, deliberate, delivered in an even tone. May 2025, Krasnoyarsk, deep into the night. A call comes into the duty station. A male voice on the line, not anxious, not stumbling over words, but deliberately calm, as though the person had thought in advance about exactly what he would say. He reports that there's a little girl on the street, very small, about 2 years old by the look of her, alone, no adults around, crying. The duty officer follows protocol. Address, description, is anyone nearby? Supposedly, he stumbled upon a crying toddler in the middle of an empty street. No adults around. No, he has no idea who she is. He was just passing by and called. The call lasts less than 2 minutes. At this point, for everyone involved, it's a routine situation. Someone's parent wasn't paying attention. The toddler slipped out of the apartment. A patrol unit will come, find a flustered mother somewhere in the neighborhood, and by morning it will all dissolve into a report. That will not happen, because near that street there will be no flustered mother, no dozing grandmother, no one. Remember this call. Its tone. Its measured calm. 20 minutes before this man dialed the duty station, something happened in a nearby apartment that would turn a routine nighttime call into a case that would make seasoned investigators' hands tremble. A concrete high-rise, 4th floor, standard layout. The door is opened by a 43-year-old man. Behind his shoulder looms another, 61 years old, and both greet the officers with that particular expression people wear when they've prepared an explanation in advance. The apartment reeks of alcohol. On a sagging couch, a little girl about 2 years old, and she's no longer screaming, just whimpering. Quietly, monotonously, the way those whimper who gave up calling for help long ago. The first thing that catches the officer's attention, on the phone, the man said he picked her up off the street, but the toddler is inside, on the couch, in the warmth. Maybe he brought her in, maybe he felt sorry for her. A logical explanation exists, but only at first glance, because next comes a second inconsistency, far more alarming. She doesn't move the way children her age move. She has noticeable developmental and care needs, requiring special attention. This is not a toddler who ran out of a building entrance and got lost in the courtyard. This is a small person who is physically incapable of ending up alone in the middle of a city at night. And here's the third inconsistency. A toddler with these needs couldn't have left on her own, couldn't have climbed out of a crib, gone down the stairs, crossed a courtyard, which means someone brought her here. Or, and this thought isn't spoken aloud yet, she never left. 2 men stand before the officers. Both are lucid enough, both repeating the same thing. Found her, don't know who she is, so we called. The story sounds coherent, but it's already cracking. In the interview protocol, there will be a dry line. Both subjects gave identical statements. Here's the key tell. The 43-year-old shrugs. Don't know, just found her. The 61-year-old says the exact same words, in the same order, with the same pauses, word for word. When 2 people tell a story in an absolutely identical way, it's either the truth, so elementary there's simply no other way to phrase it, or a rehearsed version. The duty officer radios in a query. Has anyone reported a missing child in this area? Not a single call. A 2-year-old toddler with health needs, and nobody dialed emergency services. 3 in the morning. And then one of the neighbors, an elderly man from the floor below, recalls a detail that will change everything. Earlier in the evening, he heard voices from the apartment above. A woman's voice, young, not loud, and 2 men's voices. Then silence. And then there was a sound. A heavy thud from outside, beyond the window. 4th floor. One of the officers exits the building entrance and walks around the building. The beam of a service flashlight slides along the facade, drops down to the lawn beneath the windows of that very apartment. The grass is flattened, the earth torn up. And there, on that lawn, a young woman, unconscious, Alive, but barely. No older than 20 by the look of her, wearing house clothes, not the kind you go outside in, but the kind you wear sitting in someone else's apartment. Over the radio, "We need an ambulance, urgently. A woman, serious condition, beneath the windows of the building." And from this moment, the story of "we just found her" begins to fall apart. The man who called the police 20 minutes earlier lives on the 4th floor, directly above the spot where a 19-year-old mother now lies. 7 minutes, that's how long it took the ambulance crew. And now they're on scene. A 19-year-old, multiple fractures, traumatic brain injury, internal damage consistent with a fall from height. But even in this, there's a brutal paradox. Sometimes it's not enough for everything to end instantly. She was breathing, her heart was working, consciousness was gone, and likely had been since the very second she stopped falling. In the protocol, condition critical, prognosis uncertain. That's the medical way of saying, we don't know if she'll make it to morning, but we'll do everything we can to make sure she does. A toddler with special needs, lying right now on a couch on the same floor, with 2 intoxicated men connected to what doctors are currently trying to piece a human being back together from. 2 points on the map of nighttime Krasnoyarsk, 12 meters of vertical distance, mother and daughter. And here's one fact: the man who called the police knew. He couldn't not have known. For 20 minutes he stayed silent, and in that silence, everything fit. Found her on the street. But he didn't say that 4 floors below, on the wet lawn, lay the 19-year-old mother of that very toddler. He didn't call an ambulance. He didn't ask for doctors to be sent. That silence, it wasn't confusion. It wasn't shock. It was a choice. Anyone who witnesses someone falling from a window grabs for the phone. It's a basic reflex, at the level of instinct. Someone is hurt. They need help. 20 minutes to think it over. He didn't call. 20 minutes passed between what happened at the window. 20 minutes, the interval during which brain swelling becomes irreversible. The window when you can still save someone, and when it's already too late, closes with a quiet click. When he finally dialed, he didn't call about her. He called about the toddler, about the little one who needed to be dealt with. He wasn't rescuing. He was disposing. Let's rewind a few hours. The same couch, but it's still evening. Down one of the streets walks a young woman. She's 19. In her arms, a small daughter. 2 years old, with needs that prevent her from walking on her own. The mother walks slowly, because carrying a 2-year-old in your arms for even 15 minutes is hard. And she's been walking for a long time. Where to? Unknown. Where from? Also unknown. Why is she on the street? A conflict with relatives? A rented apartment she can't afford to pay for? Or does she have no one at all in this city? From that long, unbearable, all too familiar list of reasons why young mothers with sick children end up without a roof over their heads at night, in a country where for every such case there supposedly exists a social service, a hotline, a crisis center. They all exist on paper, but on a specific street of a specific city on a specific night, they don't help. May, Krasnoyarsk, 5 to 7 degrees above zero at night. She holds her daughter close and cries because she has nowhere to go. And in this moment, she is the most vulnerable person in the entire city. A crying young woman with a toddler in her arms. For some, that's a signal to help. For others, it's a signal of an entirely different kind. 2 men approached her, ages 43 and 61. Both had already been drinking. They struck up a conversation. The gist was simple. We have an apartment, a couch. Put the little one down, get some rest. It's the middle of the night. Where are you going to go? A street gesture of concern. She hesitated. Any woman walking alone at night carries within her a rule stitched in since childhood. Don't go with strangers. But that rule has a vulnerability. It only works when you have an alternative, when you can say no and go home. But when there's nowhere to go, when you're holding a child who will freeze, when you yourself can barely stand, the rule stops being protection and becomes a luxury. She agreed, not because she trusted them, but because the choice was slim. They went up to the 4th floor. The door opened. She walked in. The door closed. The lock clicked. Remember that sound, because before it there was still a chance, and after it, there wasn't. And the apartment turned out to be exactly what apartments in buildings like these tend to be. Small, with minimal furniture, the kind where people don't live, they just sleep. The mother laid the toddler on the couch, and then the mother sat down for the first time in hours, possibly longer. She wasn't standing, wasn't walking, wasn't carrying the toddler in her arms. In that moment, she probably felt the hardest part was behind her. But the men took out a bottle, poured drinks, poured one for her too. Refusing in that situation is harder than it seems. You're in someone else's apartment, they let you stay the night, they did you a favor, and now they're handing you a glass. Joining in isn't socializing, it's a test. She drank, most likely not because she wanted to, but because at 19, alone in a stranger's home with two unfamiliar men, you instinctively do what you think will lower the tension, even though every sip carried her further from any ability to protect herself. They drank, and the men probably asked the usual questions. Where are you from? Why are you on the street? Where's your family? The standard set behind which something else can hide, an assessment. How alone is she? Is there no one behind her? How far can this go? The toddler slept on the couch. The alcohol blurred boundaries, muted anxiety. The night grew deeper. Everything that would happen next would happen behind a closed door, without witnesses, without cameras, without a single chance. The bottle emptied, the tone shifted. Glances began lingering longer than they should. Phrases became increasingly unambiguous, sober in their own walls, with a sense of total control. Across from them, a 19-year-old, also intoxicated, alone, without a phone, possibly without a single person she knew in the entire city. The mother couldn't just get up and leave, she had nowhere to go, and they understood that. And at that moment, most likely, the first demand was made. Not a request, a demand, possibly wrapped in that particular logic of debt. We let you in. Be grateful. She tried to refuse, but in an apartment where two intoxicated men had already decided how the evening would continue, a refusal isn't perceived as an answer. A refusal is a challenge, a provocation. One of them struck her, didn't push, didn't raise his hand and change his mind, struck with a fist, with that drunken, sweeping force that doesn't know its own measure. One blow. That was enough for the 19-year-old to lose consciousness and collapse to the floor in the cramped space between the table with the empty bottle, a motionless figure on the dirty linoleum, and silence. That blow is the point after which time breaks in two. Before it, everything could still have been turned around. She could have left, sobered up, and the whole evening would have remained just a bad memory. But the blow happened, and now, an unconscious mother on the floor, and two men standing over her. They didn't call emergency services. Two grown adults stood over an unconscious person, not because they were in shock, but because their minds were occupied with something else. They were thinking about what she would say when she came to, about how this looks from the outside, about what questions the police would ask. Not, this person needs help, but, we have a problem, and the problem needs to disappear. They discussed it. Not long, maybe 5 minutes. But within those minutes fit what separates a drunken outburst from a deliberate act. Two of them. Either one could have stopped the other. Either one could have said, "Enough, we're calling an ambulance." But neither one did. They went to the window. 4th floor. They lifted her. One probably held her arms, the other her legs, and two men carried her to the opening. 19 meters of empty space to the ground. Below, a lawn, soft soil, not asphalt. And that would turn out to be the only reason she didn't stop breathing instantly. They pushed her out. Free fall. Less than 2 seconds. Less than it takes to say a single sentence. 2 heartbeats. And the ground. She remained on the lawn. Alive. Formally. Technically. But shattered inside. And they were left alone. With the little girl on the couch, with an empty bottle on the table, with an open window, and an empty space on the linoleum where a minute ago her mother had been lying. They knew what they were doing. They were intoxicated, but not so intoxicated that they didn't understand. A window on the fourth floor is not an exit from a room. It's a final destination. The toddler was crying with that quiet, exhausted sound that comes when the voice is gone, when the tears have run out. That sound is physically unbearable for any human being. The two men did nothing. They had other priorities. The little one had ceased to be a living being for them. She had become evidence. Without the toddler, connected to that apartment, they could have built a version. The girl came on her own, fell on her own. But a toddler with special health needs on a stranger's couch, that answers every question before it's even asked. Between them, a pause. And a question: what do we do? For a normal person, there is no such question. You pick her up, you call for help. But those who long ago lost any relation to basic humanity, 20 minutes between the mother's fall and the call to the duty station. Not approximately, precisely 20 minutes, because the time of the fall was reconstructed from testimony, and the time of the call was logged to the second. 20 minutes is not shock. It's not paralysis. They sat in the apartment and weighed their options, calmly, methodically. Option 1, the truth. But the truth means handcuffs, discarded faster than the rest. Option 2, silence. Wait until morning. But the toddler is crying, the walls are thin, the neighbors will hear, and then the police will come without warning. And below, something that's impossible to explain. They chose option 3, a call to the police, but about something else. Not about the mother, about the toddler. A completely different story. We stepped outside, and there she was, crying. Simple, clean, no connection. Most likely they rehearsed the cover story out loud, twice, 3 times, comparing phrasing. 20 minutes during which they could have called an ambulance, and then a male voice dials the number and delivers the phrase we've already heard. Found her on the street, crying, which is the only truth in it. Only the reason isn't that the toddler got lost, it's that 20 minutes earlier, her mother was pushed from a window. And he's not calling to help. He's calling to hide. The police will take the toddler, process the paperwork, hand her over to services, and he'll go to sleep. But he didn't account for what lay beneath his windows, for the fact that she was still breathing. A plan devised by 2 intoxicated men over 20 minutes of panic. That's not a plan. It's self-deception, and they thought they had cut the story in 2, the toddler separate, the mother separate. But a patrol officer who walks around the building and looks down will connect both halves in 30 seconds. In the case file, there's a detail that speaks louder than any testimony. On the kitchen table, 3 glasses of alcohol. Although the residents would insist there were only 2 of them, the investigator reconstructed the picture not in days, in hours. A lie woven in haste doesn't withstand even the lightest pressure. First, the toddler herself. A child with those needs is registered in the system. She has a medical file. From the description, they identified her almost instantly, and with her, the mother, who was already lying in intensive care, brought in that same night from beneath the windows of that same building. Second, the neighbors. The concrete walls became the main witnesses. Someone heard voices in the evening, 1 female, 2 male, escalating into shouting. Someone made out a heavy sound from the direction of the courtyard. Third, the suspects themselves. Their stories crumbled at the first serious interrogation. They couldn't explain 3 glasses where supposedly 2 people drank. Couldn't explain the woman's jacket on the chair, the tiny shoes in the hallway. Both were detained that same night, in that same apartment. And the toddler was wrapped in a government-issue blanket and handed first to medics, then to child welfare specialists. The steady beep of a cardiac monitor counted off seconds in the ICU. On the bed lay the 19-year-old, the same one who hours earlier had been walking through evening Krasnoyarsk with a toddler in her arms. Tubes, IVs, machines that breathed for her. 2 days, 48 hours. She never regained consciousness. 12 meters is serious, but statistics know cases where people have come back from even greater heights. But statistics are averages. Behind every average stands a specific fate. She fell on the left side of the graph. After 2 days, the monitors showed a flat line. She was 19. She had a small daughter with special health needs. A few days earlier, she'd been walking through the nighttime city because she had nowhere to go. She never saw her little girl again, never learned that she'd been taken, that she was safe. She didn't get the chance. The system knows how to feed on schedule and fill out forms by protocol, but it doesn't know how to replace the one thing a 2-year-old needs: the presence of that person whose scent, whose voice, whose heartbeat means one word: safety. And she has developmental needs, the very kind of care that somehow, impossibly, a 19-year-old mother provided, barely more than a teenager herself. Without money, without housing, without anyone's help, she held on. Alone. She managed, and the irreversibility of it. There's no understanding that Mama is gone, that Mama won't come back. She waits. Not consciously, but with that deep, wordless expectation that lives in the habit of turning her head at the sound of footsteps behind a door. In nighttime crying that has no reason, except one. In the case materials, there's a detail. They didn't take the mother's phone, didn't erase her messages, but tried to clean up traces. A complete absence of preparation, and that speaks to motive more precisely than any testimony. Most likely, the original plan didn't include the window. The two men didn't approach her with the thought of how it would end. The motivation was simpler, more primitive, dirtier. They saw a young, vulnerable, lonely woman. They invited her in, offered shelter, and waited for a certain development of the evening. The scenario broke. She refused. And expectation collided with reality. They wanted one thing. They received a refusal. And what followed was irreversible. This isn't a story about the deceased. This is a story about two men who, at every decision point, chose the worst possible option, again and again, until they hit the very bottom. It was to this very door on the 4th floor that she came that night, holding her child close. She was 19. She was cold. She was scared. When the door opened, warmth, a kettle, voices, she stepped inside. Not because she trusted them, but because the nighttime city had left her not a single other option. The door closed. Only by then, it no longer mattered. If this story stays with you, subscribe to our channel, not for the numbers or the algorithm, so that stories like these don't disappear in the feed between recipes and memes, so that someone remembers, because not remembering means accepting it, and that's something we cannot do. Like, subscribe to our channel. See you next time.